I'm Kavya,
And I'm Kennedy.
and today we're going to be talking to you guys about Tegonni, an African adaptation of Antigone written by Femi Osofisan and published in 1999.
Okay, so about the author. Femi Osofisan is a Nigerian writer known for his societal critiques and his traditional African dramas. Osofisan enjoys blending African art with ancient Greek source material. His example of his work is Woman of Owu from Euripides' The Trojan Woman. He also features heavily in his works themes of gender.
So let's talk about the background of Nigeria itself. So this play is meant to take place in the 19th century of Nigeria within the Yoruba tribe. So Nigeria itself was under British rule from 1900 to 1960, but after British rule, it wasn't fully recovered from the effects of colonialism. For example, Nigeria has struggled since then to recover a national identity due to these British fractures as well as favoritism of certain ethnic groups. You'll see in the play there's a lot of ethnic tension as well as conflict within the groups. In addition, there's been a lot of major political uprisings within the 19th and 20th century in Nigeria. These include the Bosa Rebellion, the Igbo guerrilla warfare, as well as the Women's Revolt, some of which were successful, but for the most part, the British suppressed these rulings. Um, in the play, Osofisan also wanted to kind of establish a fresh take. A lot of times, plays focus primarily on colonialism, and while this is a major part of the play, Osofisan also wanted to address the fact that Nigeria also faced ethnic division and alienation before the British had come into contact.
Okay, so to get into a little bit about the cast and who's who. So Tegonni is an embodiment of Tigoni. She's like resistant towards oppressive forces. She's not submissive. And then General Ross, he's like violent. He invokes the and dismisses will at law. So he's obviously modeled after Creon. And then Oyekunle and Adaloro is the Etocles and Polynices, so Antigone's brothers. And then Antigone herself, she embodies the storyline of the Greek Antigone. She's like that personified, although she's a little bit pessimistic as soon as she gets off the boat. And then Alan Jones is Antigone's fiance slash love interest, who later becomes her husband.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into the storyline based on these characters. So, like I mentioned, it is set in the late 19th century, so it's kind of post colonial, and they're exploring some of the impacts of that. When we kind of get introduced to Tegonni and her people, it's clear they've just suffered, particularly within the struggle within her brothers, just like in Antigone. So, Oyekunle is kind of like Polynices, and that's the war's him against his brother, as well as the British sponsored forces of the Hausa, which brings in another component of colonialism and its impacts. So we also learned that there's a lot of strife going on because Tegonni wants to be a sculptor, and she actually starts a sculptor guild with other women, but she's scorned because it's like man's work, and Tegonni resists this. In addition, Tegonni is also engaged to Alan Ross, who is white. He is the district officer, um, and they do this by choice. It's not a forced or arranged marriage or anything. In addition, just like in Antigone, Lieutenant Carter Ross wants to dispose of her brother's bodies, and Tegonni is clearly against this, so Ross orders her executed. And then by the end of the play, Tegonni and Jones end up dying due to a conflict with Ross, and then Ross ends up dying as well of a heart attack, and unlike Antigone, he does not learn his lesson. Something that Osofisan really wanted to emphasize is that he did not want colonialism to be the only focus of the play, because if he did that, then there wouldn't be space for any other dialogue about other issues that were plaguing Nigeria and Africa as a whole, which is why you'll see many themes within this play, especially female agency, something he really wanted to stress.
Okay, some themes explored within the play is culture hybridity. A large conflict in Antigone is her marriage with Ross. So it wasn't so much so that he was white, but that he wasn't of their tribe. And so, like, Ross, who obviously hated that Antigone was black, was against it, and the chief was against it because he was like, why couldn't you get someone from her tribe? But there was a reason why she couldn't get someone from her tribe, because she probably had someone from her tribe, but something happened, and so they had to break the marriage off. So
Yeah.
And that's one of the themes.
Primarily as well is because she wanted to work as a sculptor. A lot of people are saying she wouldn't find a marriage because of her wanting to do this job. In addition, another theme is tradition versus progress. Tegonni clearly represents progress. She also represents wanting to coexist with the British. There is some of that, for example, her marriage to Jones, which is actually a pretty big conflict in this play. In addition, she resists patriarchy and fights for racial harmony. Another theme explored is female agency. Like we mentioned, Tegonni has a guild of bronze casters. In addition, her friends also come to her rescue many times, and by the end, she actually wins. She and her bridesmaids are able to defeat the imperialist soldiers, and at the end, Antigone, the Greek Antigone, resurrects Tegonni and they go into the afterlife.
So the effects of colonialism. So Carter Ross represents like a violent, authoritarian, like colonial man. He's like very overbearing in the fact that he is a racist. And so in the play, it's also like an allegory for African resistance against the British. So like when Antigone stands up against like Carter Ross and when she sneaks into his room and tries to kill him, so like that's her standing up to colonialism as well, symbolically.
Okay, so now let's kind of talk about reception and maybe how this play was received, as well as some of the biggest identifying factors of the play. So, firstly, is kind of the grapple between myth and history. Osofisan really likes to toggle between this because a lot of these characters are very meta theatrical. They're aware of their drama and try to intensify it for the sake of the play. The biggest example is probably Antigone.
Yeah. As soon as Antigone like exits the boat with her captors, which we think, well, we and the receptor think that were her captors in her original storyline, we, so like she is a because she's aware that she's in a play. She's like, oh, let's get this over with. We already know what's gonna happen. So like in the beginning, she's like she knows that her storyline will prevail through Tegonni. So like yeah.
Right. Yeah, Antigone, and when you mentioned she was really pessimistic, she kind of does that a lot. She talks about how this time it'll be the same like last time. There's no point in fighting because Tegonni is just going to end up having the same fate. So she definitely kind of acknowledges how she's directly from the Greek play. Another part of reception that's really, really important is female power. So even before the British arrived, patriarchy is a huge component of their community. The biggest example is, for example, Tegonni's marriage to Alan Jones, as well as her wanting to be a sculptor, and she actually does win, unlike Antigone.
Yes. And so another theme is oppressor versus oppressed. So like the role of oppressor is shared in a way between the British colonizers and the unwaveringly traditional men of their tribe. So when Antigone introduced that she wanted to like do this role that usually the men of the tribe would do, they scared her off and they wanted to like burn her as if she was a witch. And so that means that like the role of the oppressed is shared between Tegonni and like the African population as a whole because like although it wasn't emphasized, the white people were there to colonize the tribe.
Right. And then another point that's important is race relations. Again, we mentioned Chief Osukon and as well as Carter Ross were very wary of the marriage, even people within her tribe and people outside of her tribe. And this is actually probably the biggest conflict in the play, not even the burial of her brothers. In addition, something interesting was when the play was first performed in America, there was a lot of disagreement with the interracial marriage as well. In the article, we read about how African American women, in particular, were against the interracial marriage of Jones and Tegonni.
Okay, so what's interesting about the published text versus the play? In the play, at the first like rendition of it, they didn't have any white characters, and so it was an all black character cast. In the black characters that played the white characters, they had white sashes wrapped around their arms to signify that they were of a different race. And in the public text, like Antigone is said to be white, but obviously because it was an all black cast in the rendition, Antigone was black.
Hmm. And then also in the published text, the ending is a little different. So Antigone, as well as Yemoja, Nigerian water goddess, sail away to kind of the afterlife or spiritual place, but Tegonni does die in the play. So yeah, overall, we want you to really think about power as a big tool that Osofisan uses. For example, colonialized versus the colonizers, female versus male, tradition versus progress, and really ponder about how that impacts the reception.
Yes.
Thank you.